Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railway's Dorion and then subsequently Kinghorn subdivision. We are just to the west of the community of Beardmore here in the municipality of Greenstone. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be picking up where we left off on a previous hike, which we did last fall. So we are just to the west of a former station on the line, which is known as Warneford Station, which is just up ahead over there. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working our way just under 4 miles to the west to where we hooked up with a previous hike. So this is yet again another redo. So we've been through this section before and we're redoing it because there's some new information that we want to take a look at. We have Luna here in the trailer, trying to save some wear and tear on her paws. This is going to be interesting. This is the first time using the trailer this year. And the ballast isn't particularly awesome through this area. So hopefully I make it without keeling over. All right, so what we should do is we should do our usual history lesson before we get started. So you can see here, or you can hear, maybe you can see through the trees, we are right beside a major river here. This is the Blackwater River, and we've been following the Blackwater River from just east of Jellicoe. So we've been sort of paralleling this river for the better part of about 25 miles or so, maybe a little bit less, but here the river picks up speed. You can hear there's some rapids. All right, so let's do the history lesson. So, oh crap. All right, we got to stop. So I just found this. So you'll notice that there is a flanger sign here. I don't know. There is a ballast pit that's coming up. I don't know if this sign is for the ballast pit. Now, we did find last year when we were doing that section, we did find a flanger sign on the other side of Warneford where the siding would have started. But it's weird because the siding at Warneford was taken up in the late 50s. So it's weird that the signs would still be here and using kind of a more modern post and things like that. So unusual. So again, I don't know if that flanger sign is for the siding here or for the ballast pit that's coming up, but it seems very far from the ballast pit. Anyway, so history lesson. So this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental ambition. The Canadian Northern Company had got its start in Manitoba way back in 1896. As we pass through here, you can see just a little bit of rock work. This is really the only rock work on this section here. So you can see a little cut here as we run beside the Blackwater. Not particularly high, maybe 8 feet or so, 9 feet. So the Canadian Northern Railway Company got its start in Manitoba in 1896, buying up some old lines and some old charters and things like that. Their first big splash was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, and Winnipeg. And that line was built between 1899 and 1902. Now I have to pause here momentarily because we do have a feature. And once we finish our history lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more about the feature. So we do have this is the beginning of the ballast pit. And this, in the days when the line was running, this was known as the Beardmore pit. Everybody called it the Beardmore pit. I call it the Warneford pit because it's beside Warneford Station. But again, during the time that it was open, Warneford Station didn't exist, so it was known as the Beardmore pit. So after Canadian Northern completed their line between Port Arthur and Winnipeg, they began construction and buying up old rail lines throughout the prairies, and Canadian Northern sort of became very synonymous with the prairies, particularly the northern part of the prairies. See a piece of tie here. Lots of spikes. It's almost like they didn't clean this section here. There's spikes everywhere. And here you can see there's a telegraph pole just right down there. So at the same time Canadian Northern was building all of these lines throughout the prairies, they began doing the same process north from Toronto. building some lines and acquiring some other lines until they eventually reached up into the Sudbury area. And it was around about that time that Canadian Northern, again, you could see all the remnants, spikes and rail anchors, and you'll see some boats, yes, you'll see some boats. There's a bolt down there. Here's a tie plate. I meant to say bolts, so rail connector bolts. Around that time, Canadian Northern began to sort of look at the long-term future, and they realized that without a transcontinental line, their railway was never going to be, their network was never going to survive. Now the problem is Canadian Northern did not want to build the portion of line between the end of steel near Sudbury at a place called Ruel and Port Arthur, because it was going to be very difficult, 550 miles through the Canadian Shield, and therefore very expensive. And so they looked at all kinds of different options, you know, in terms of kind of working around that, including setting up an arrangement with Canadian Pacific. You can see a tie plate here. You can see tons of spikes again. Again, like, it just seemed like they didn't clean up the spikes from here. And unfortunately, none of that worked. And so Canadian Northern was forced to build. So again, construction began in the latter part of 1911 and was completed in 1914. So New Year's Day 1914, the last spike was driven. And the line, unfortunately, there was a lot of work to do. So the line didn't officially open until October of 1915. Now, unfortunately, around that time, Canadian Northern started running into financial difficulties brought on by World War I and a lot of the construction costs. So for example, building this section, building through the mountains of British Columbia. And so a couple of years later, by 1917, the company was essentially insolvent and had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And so in late 1918, this line was merged, amalgamated, whatever you want to describe it, with a bunch of other Canadian government-owned bankrupt lines called the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger formed Canadian National Railways. And so in 1922, the name of this line changed. It had originally been the Nipigon subdivision of Canadian Northern Railway, and it became the Dorion subdivision of Canadian National Railways. And then it continued as such until 1960, when there was a major reorganization at CN. And again, you can see all the spikes, you can see the tie plates. And so in 1960, the Dorion subdivision was merged with the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision, and that merger produced the Kinghorn, one line running all the way from Long Lac to, at the time, Port Arthur, which again now is Thunder Bay. And the line continued to operate until 2005, when CN decided to discontinue service on the line, and the rails were ripped up between 2008 and 2010. All right, so first thing that we should talk about here, so you can see that there's a cut-off metal post. That is the milepost 76 marker. So milepost 76 on the Kinghorn. Now, because this line used to have different names, it actually had different mileages. So this is milepost 76, so 76 miles from Long Lac, but the original lines, the Nipigon subdivision, the Dorion subdivision, used to start in Jellicoe. And so what we need to do is we need to subtract 49.7 miles from that to get the original mileage. So the original mileage becomes 26.3. Okay. It is, it's the middle of May. What day is it today? The 20th. It is Victoria Day today here in Canada, so it is a national holiday. God save the Queen, Queen Victoria. Thanks for the holiday. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this pit here. Okay. So the pit, the preliminary work for this pit was actually done in the 1970s, and I want to thank Greg for that information. And so this pit was identified as a location that they could use for materials. And so there was a 2,500 foot through spur, so basically connected at both ends. The spur was actually installed in 1981, and the spur was officially known as Pit Track KI 38. And it was removed from service in 1989 and then reactivated again in 1996. So what's interesting about this pit is that there was a major upgrade that was done to this line in 1982. Basically all of the ballast at the top to that point was all just pit run ballast, and so the ballast was basically removed, and the line was reballasted at considerable effort. You can see there's a little bit of rock work here, considerable effort and probably considerable expense as well. And a lot of the, I would imagine pretty much most of the ballast that is the bane of my existence here, I hate cycling through this, it's brutal, came from this pit. This pit was also used for numerous other upgrades as well. So for example, last week we were just east of Jellicoe, and there was a large trestle that was filled in, 132-foot trestle, and all of the riprap and then the ballast came from this pit. And so maybe what we'll do right now is I'll show you a couple of things. First of all, I'll show you a map. Now, if you haven't noticed, we've been curving this entire time. This is, I believe, the sharpest curve on this line. It's crazy how sharp the curve is. We basically make, I don't even know what the degree, the curvature is. It's probably got to be the maximum curvature that's allowed. Because literally what we're doing is we're kind of skirting around this ridge here, and we're following the valley of the Blackwater. So as they were building the railway line, they're obviously looking for the path of least resistance. So they're following the Blackwater River, and then the Blackwater River turns. So the Blackwater River is kind of running to the west, and then it makes an abrupt turn. So they have to make this abrupt turn as well. And so you'll see this crazy curve, and you'll see the pit on there, and then I'll show you maybe a couple of timetables and stuff where you can see the information about the pit as well. All right, so what we're gonna do as well is, on our way east, we took a little detour, and the last time I was here I didn't go up and look, but we went up and had a look at the actual inside of the pit, because it's a few hundred meters. I guess they've took so much material out of here, that the pit extends quite a distance away from the track. And and there's actually the remains. Somebody had told me, I think that came from Richard, another CN guy. Here you can see a piece of a telegraph pole, that there was the remains of the crusher that was there, and we certainly saw that. So we'll take a look at that clip. All right, so we moved our way several hundred meters to the east of the railway grade. So we're here in the heart of the pit here at Warneford, or Beardmore, as it was known in the railway days. So here you can see part of this this pit. So here they were basically hauling out both aggregate, so both gravel and rock. You can actually see just over there, there's a large chunk of a piece of machinery or something that was left behind here. Maybe we'll head up there. Oh, hard to push the trailer up here. So you can see there's some concrete foundations here, and you can see this piece of machinery here. It says Trailor 48 by 60 Bulldog Jaw Crusher. Allentown, Pennsylvania. Makes me think of the Billy Joel song, Allentown. So yeah, so anyway, they were digging out aggregate, and they were also crushing ballast here, and I believe a good chunk of the ballast, if not all of it, came from this pit when the line was reballasted in 1982. And then there was material that came from other areas as well. Down there you can see Luna's just stepping on it there. You can see a fish plate bolt or rail connector bolt. Okay, so let's head our way back over to the grade. All right, so let's finish up getting through the pit here, or getting by the pit. So up here we actually have a couple of ties that are still in the place. Again, it's okay day today. It might rain later. Hopefully we can beat the rain. It's the middle of May. It's a beautiful day. It's warm. It's actually too warm. There's not a stitch of wind, and so I'm like overheating, and the bugs are just starting to come out, so the black flies are all over the place. So here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ties that are still in the place here. And then if we come over here, so there's the ties. So here is the tail end of the ballast spur, and you can see some ties still here as well. And there's a tie plate, and so you can see the where the spur was. You can actually see some of the ties still here as well. Okay, there's one here, some bits of insulator. All right, you can see all of these ties. Look at all the ties still here. All right. Whew. It's heavy pulling the dog. All right, let's get back on the grade here, and then we're gonna pause and resume our, I guess, southward for a bit. There's a bolt, there's another tie, here's another tie. All right, back on the grade here. Okay, so all you can see, look at all the pieces of ties here. It's a graveyard of ties. Okay, so let's hold up here momentarily, and then we'll keep plugging our way along to the west.